So, today we're going to unpack the very strange, very complicated history of a single chemical compound, one that's been seen as a wonder drug, a secret weapon, and a public menace, and sometimes all of those at once.
And this is the man who kicked the whole thing off, Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann. He called LSD his problem child, which you have to admit is a pretty massive understatement for a substance that would help define a generation and then basically vanish from legitimate science for 40 years. That idea, though, the problem child, it's the perfect way to look at this story.
So that's the real question here, isn't it? How did this one chemical, LSD-25, manage to live so many completely different lives? It's a story that, as you'll see, takes some seriously bizarre turns.
And it all starts, like a lot of strange stories do, pretty much by accident, in a quiet lab in Switzerland. Okay, so Hofmann first cooks up LSD back in 1938. He was actually looking for something to stimulate circulation, but the initial tests just made animals kind of restless. So he shelves it, and it just sits there for 5 whole years. Then, in 1943, he gets what he called a peculiar presentiment, a hunch, and decides to make another batch. On April 16th, he accidentally gets a tiny bit on his fingertips and experiences this dreamlike state. So 3 days later, he decides to test it on himself deliberately. He takes what he assumes is a tiny dose, 250 micrograms, which we now know is an absolutely enormous amount. His bike ride home that afternoon is now, well, legendary.
But what's really fascinating is how the story got polished over time. In his memoir from 1979, he's talking about kaleidoscopic, fantastic images and exploding in colored fountains. But his original lab report from 1943, it's a lot less poetic. He calls it an acute poisoning with extremely unpleasant symptoms. He was utterly convinced he was losing his mind. So yeah, the psychedelic revolution didn't exactly begin with a moment of cosmic bliss.
But even with that terrifying first go-round, the scientific community saw something really remarkable. The problem child was about to be recast as a child prodigy.
So in 1947, the first scientific paper on LSD's effects on people comes out, and it classifies the drug as a fantasticum. Now, that was a term from the 1920s used for things like mescaline, and what this did was put LSD into a serious medical context. This wasn't just some weird poison, it was something to be studied.
And almost overnight, the psychiatric world was buzzing. One idea was that LSD could create a temporary model psychosis, so they could finally study conditions like schizophrenia. Others saw it as this incredible tool for therapy, a way to get at suppressed memories. And there was serious research into using it to treat alcoholism and to help terminally ill patients face death with less fear. For most of the 1950s, you'd even see positive articles about it in places like Time magazine. For a brief moment, it wasn't a problem child, it was a wonder child.
But at the exact same time that psychiatrists were looking at LSD as a key to unlock the mind, a very different group was looking at it as a key for something else entirely.
The story here starts in the late 1940s. The brand new Central Intelligence Agency was, let's say, exploring some pretty aggressive interrogation techniques. Their first big foray into mind control was codenamed Project Bluebird.
A few years later, in 1951, that program evolved into Project Artichoke, which really ramped up the search for a so-called truth serum.
And then, in 1953, it became Project MK-Ultra. This was the big one, the infamous top-secret program to figure out if they could actually control human behavior. And of course, LSD, with its incredible power to alter consciousness, became one of their star players.
Their methods were, well, they were something else. The Church Committee, which was a big congressional investigation in the 70s, found that the CIA experimented on just about everyone: prisoners, mental patients, and, as the report says, they randomly picked up unsuspecting patrons in bars in the United States and slipped LSD into their food and drink. They were literally drugging American citizens without their knowledge, just to see what would happen.
And the crazy thing is, we probably don't even know the half of it. In 1973, when the director caught wind that Congress was about to start digging into this, he ordered all the MK-Ultra files destroyed. The only reason we know anything is because some records were misfiled. The official number they admitted to destroying was 152 files.
So you've got these two very different, very controlled worlds, the clinic and the secret CIA safe house. But the problem child was about to run away from home and go very, very public.
It really happened along 2 tracks. First, you had the intellectuals and the artists. The actor Cary Grant gave these glowing interviews about his LSD therapy. The author Aldous Huxley was a huge proponent.
But then came the second path. And this one was all about a Harvard psychologist named Timothy Leary. He went from being a researcher to a full-blown evangelist, telling everyone to turn on, tune in, drop out.
And this really shows you the split. You had the clinical world, right? Controlled setting, a clear goal, a doctor watching over you. And then you had the counterculture, unsupervised, purely recreational, with your only guide being your friends or maybe some self-appointed guru. The two worlds couldn't have been more different. Well, with a drug this powerful suddenly everywhere, being used in completely uncontrolled ways, you can probably guess what happened next. The backlash was coming, and it was coming fast. And the shutdown was swift. In '65, Sandoz, Hofmann's company, just threw in the towel. They stopped all production, sick of being associated with the chaos. A year later, it's illegal across the U.S. Then, in 1970, the Controlled Substances Act puts the nail in the coffin. It classifies LSD as Schedule 1, the most restrictive category possible, basically saying it has zero medical value. By about 1980, all legitimate research was dead. The door just slammed shut. And for decades, that was pretty much it. Story over. But in the last few years, science has started to very cautiously crack that door back open, wondering if maybe, just maybe, those early researchers were onto something. For example, in 2012, some researchers went back and pulled together all the data from those old alcoholism studies from the 50s and 60s. And when they analyzed it all together, they found that 59% of the patients who got LSD showed a major drop in alcohol misuse. That's compared to only 38% in the other groups. It was a pretty strong signal that something real had been happening there. And then, in 2014, a Swiss psychiatrist named Peter Gasser did the first controlled study of LSD therapy in more than 40 years. And his goal? It was exactly one of the original ideas from the 50s, helping terminally ill patients with their end-of-life anxiety. His conclusion was simple and pretty powerful. He said their anxiety went down and stayed down. The problem child was finally back in the lab. So it brings us all the way back to the beginning. Was LSD really a problem child by nature? Or was it just an incredibly powerful discovery that had the misfortune of being born into the middle of the Cold War and a massive cultural upheaval? Its whole story is kind of a wild lesson in how much the world around a discovery can change its destiny.